Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. It's the 12th now of February 2015. It'll be that bleeding Valentine's Day tomorrow, you know, where all you women in love get your annual box of chocolates, your bunch of flowers and your ride, and then you're told to get lost for the rest of the year. I know, I'm very cynical, but it's, actually, do you know that the St. Valentine is a dead saint in a box in Dublin? Like, it's a skull with some bones, and it's run by the Carmelite nuns, I think. So that's like real romantic. Some guy's bones in a box. It's probably the only bone that the nuns get at Valentine's. I shouldn't say that, but I did. Yeah, I've got a huge show tonight. I better get true to this because I'm only 59 minutes from Tulpas. That's a very bad Gene Pitney accent. I always think of Phoenix. Oh, speaking of Phoenix Nights, that TV show, that sitcom. Last year I did a talk in one in Hull, in a real north of England working man's club in Hull. And when I got there, I was looking for somebody, and I got talking to the barman, and he was looking for somebody to open the room, and he goes, "We got a lad here who's going to talk about Illuminati." It really was it was like Phoenix Nights meets conspiracy. Anyway, salutations, good evening, and welcome to the Velocity of Now. I'll try to get serious from this point on. I got wonderful feedback from last week's show. Apparently the HAL 2001 Space Oddity cybersex went down with all you degenerates, and some of you got a great laugh out of my impromptu impression of Sinead O'Connor. Tonight's a full show. My website is thomassheridanarts.com. My YouTube channel is Thomas Sheridan Arts. If you want to look at the video, the surrealist, man, videos of this show, go to newsymbolsmedia.tv, and also all the links pertain to the topics of tonight's show, which is really about cannibalism, corpses, and, quantum gins. You'll find them all there. Well, the ones I can supply. Now, tonight, before I get started, I just want to talk about that video of the two kids in Hampstead in England that's doing the rounds. I don't think people should be sharing that publicly on their wall, even if they think the story is legit. I don't. Because those kids could be damaged later on in life through either bullying or stigmatization. So if you had to share that video about the two kids talking about being, raped and brought into churches where they sacrificed babies and danced on the skulls and all this nonsense, go do it in private messages. Don't be doing it publicly. I have to give kudos to Infowars.com for making a very, for them, mature video on the subject, where they showed the kids' faces blurred out, and they basically agreed, like myself, the thing is a hoax. The kids are clearly being coached, and the adults in that video need to be investigated, particularly the guy who says, coaches them, or should I say grooms them, to say fear is the mind killer, and they can't wait to answer him back exactly as he told them. I was half waiting for him to give them a bag of sweets at the end of it. It's disgusting. But anyway, that's... Now, I'm not saying that these things don't happen. Of course they do. I'm going to be covering a story from history and a few things like this tonight. But that doesn't mean that you have to go ballistic and bonkers and throw the stuff all over the place. So, be careful with that stuff. The kids will be doubly abused by sharing those videos off them. If you must do it privately, or share the ones where their faces are blurred out. I just don't think it's right. Those kids who don't even know what they're saying are all over the internet. Oh, someone asked me what other shows do I like. Well, after this show, I haven't heard much of it, but after this show is George and D. Apparently picking up on similar topics to what I'm talking to tonight. But the other shows I do listen to are The Bridge with Kira, The Opperman Report with Ed Opperman. I like Tom Sacker's Spy Cultures broadcasts. And The Moon Lodge, that's out every new moon with Carrie Lee and Kira Young again. I love James Corbett's The Corbett Report. He's done a great one this week on the alien psyop. And Carrie Lee also has a new show coming out on People's Internet Radio on her own Recipe for Anarchy stuff. That's the name of her website is recipeforanarchy.com. It's brilliant, actually. And I like Niall Murphy's, or Opaque Lens, as he calls him. Sorry, Niall. I can never, ever call you Opaque Lens. It's much too hippie for me. But he has a show called Shamanic Freedom Radio, which I barely let him away with that title. And Niall's got a very good podcast this week, and it's kind of the opposite. He's getting more prosaic and grounded. I'm getting a little bit more out there, shall we say? But that's okay. You know, that's how things will progress. I'm proud of my ignorance, because as long as I'm ignorant, I'll always have the joy of learning. Anyway, the first story I want to talk to tonight is a doozy. This is I love this one. You remember Charles Manson was going to get married to some chick in her 20s? Well, there's just come out tonight that the whole thing was a weird and interesting scam. I'm going to read this for you now. Charles Manson's fiancée allegedly only wanted him for his corpse. So that really brings it, you only wanted me for my body. Well, it's true in his case. Corcoran, California. The news of famous criminal Charles Manson's recent engagement to a woman in her 20s turned some heads late last year, but a new twist in the story is even more unbelievable. According to the New York Post journalist Daniel Simone, told the tabloid that the engagement was a scheme by the fiancé to profit from putting Manson's body on public display after his death. Simone and a collaborator, Heidi Jordan, are currently working on a book, The Retrial of Charles Manson. The authors claim to have spoken with Manson regularly before his phone privileges were suspended. Manson, 80, can you believe that he's 80 now, and Afton Elaine Burton, who according to the Post is now 27 and goes by the name Star, applied for a marriage license in November. That's last year, 2014. The license expired last week, but they had originally planned to reapply for another. But now, in an unexpected twist, as if that wasn't weird enough, Simone told the Post that it was all a scheme. Burton and a friend, Craig Hammond, said they planned to place Manson's remains inside a glass crypt after his death, similar to the famous tomb of Vladimir Lenin in Moscow. They believed it would be a popular attraction for tourists. They hatched their plan after learning that Burton married Manson. California law would give her possession of Manson's remains. According to the New York Post, Simone and Manson didn't want to marry Burton anymore. According to the New York Post, Simone said, sorry, I read it wrong. It's very small text. According to the New York Post, Simone said Manson doesn't want to marry Burton anymore. Oh, his little heart was broken. He finally realized that he'd been played for a fool. Oh, there's certainly a song in that. That's interesting for him, you know. The irony of Charles Manson being played for a fool by a woman, considering, you know, he had Squeaky Fromme and Susan Atkin and the rest of them. Simone told the paper Manson believes he is immortal. Therefore, he feels it's a stupid idea to begin with. Like he's an elf or something. He's like, what's his name in the Lord of the Rings? He's the leader of the elves, Elrond. Manson faces a life sentence and is currently serving at a California state prison in Corcoran, California. He's not eligible for parole on 2027. Well, if he's immortal, he'll get out of prison. No doubt about that. This story is just. I've only just found out about this story, and this is the stream of thought coming into my head. What was she after? Is she a member of a cult, and is this some kind of weird cult thing? Is it just a quick cash-in thing? Is it just a funny idea? I kind of would want to see the corpse of Charles Manson in a glass box. I don't know why. It'd be more of a curiosity. It'd probably be better if they had like a little kind of swastika on his forehead. If that was made into a propeller with a motor and spun around on the top of his head, that might be kind of cool, or something like that. I don't know what the real thing for that was, but they definitely would have been on for a winner, because there's enough weirdos out there who would want to see him, including myself. That's also interesting about the Vladimir Putin Sorry, Putin. That's wrong. Putin. That's the wrong Russian dictator. The Lenin body inside that tomb in Moscow. I find that so strange. A temple in a so-called atheistic system. Well, you know, we all know that's Marxism and Bolshevism was never atheistic to begin with. But in both cases, we're talking about the death cult, the idea of the worship of the corpse. This is something that's always fascinated me, the idea of a cult based upon death. Either the cult embracing a doomsday event like a comet, the end of the world, or some kind of harbingers of destruction, like the Christian idea, the four horsemen, the apocalypse. Or the idea of the dead body being a object of worship itself. Similar, funny enough, to what I was saying about St. Valentine and his box of bones tomorrow. They will be lining up out on the street in Dublin to actually see the box of bones to celebrate love. Catholicism is great that way. You know, you have all these churches in the Mediterranean countries, in Portugal and Spain and Italy and Croatia that are made out of bones and skulls. And then you have the Mexicans who have the Day of the Dead. On one level, it's very good. It's very healthy. On another level, we in the West are not mature enough to be involved in this kind of thing, especially like in the English-speaking countries, because the actual worship of the corpse and the bones is what really would happen and really takes place, rather than in these Mediterranean countries and Latin countries where they don't actually worship the bones, but they remember and think about the meaning of life and death and all this kind of thing. We in the English world, unfortunately, English-speaking world, don't have that kind of maturity and depth in relation to death. We kind of live in fear of death because we can't take all our material garbage with us. But I knew there was something not right about, you know, apart from the obvious, you know, it didn't seem, when the story first broke, it didn't seem like the typical, you know, erotomanic, histophilia, crazy chick who falls in love with a serial killer. It didn't seem that way. There was something, for starters, she was too interesting looking. She didn't look like one of those, generally those kinds of women. They're usually sort of suburbanites. They don't really have an interesting life. They don't really have an interesting background. They're very mundane. This woman looking at her that wanted to marry Charles Manson, she was kind of cool looking. She's kind of interesting looking. But there you go. Charles, he's got a broken heart. You know, I could just see him now sitting there. She broke my heart. There's definitely a country song in there somewhere, you know. She broke my heart 'cause she only wanted my corpse to put on display. She wouldn't get me a hearse. She put me in a glass box 'cause I couldn't get in hers. 'Cause I am immortal. Charles Manson. Yeah, there's definitely a song in there somewhere. Yeah, there used to be an American right-wing radio talk show host I used to listen to back in the day on I think it was NBC. The AM station, whatever it was in New York, the news station. And he used to go, Bob Grant was his name, and he was a right-wing commentator. But he was funny, and he'd always finish the show with, "It's sick and getting sicker." Well, I think I could change that. It's surreal and getting more surreal. I mean, I didn't watch the Grammys or anything this week, but that's all death cult stuff new, too. Poor Whitney Houston's daughter having the life support pulled on the same day as her mother, and there's all these kinds of weird things that go on in music. You know, like the guy from Boney M who sang Rasputin, did he drop dead on Rasputin's birthday in Leningrad or something like that? It was just, you couldn't make these things up. The music, this is why I could never actually become and stay an atheist or an agnostic, because there's too many synchronistic things that go on. Like just even tonight's show, I started off talking about the bones of the dead Saint Valentine in a box, and and then I went without even thinking about it or even knowing about it. I was going to talk about that anyway. I hear about like Charles Manson's body in a glass box, you know, and they're the kind. These synchronicities, the more they happen, the more you embrace them, the more you go with them, because they're like a muscle. They really are true. They you know, the more you work at it, the more you notice them, and it's not coincidence. It's not anything like that. Now, I caused a bit of a furor not so long ago when I spoke about Guinness and all these people going, "How can you say bad things about Guinness? You know, it's the sacred beverage of my liver destruction. How dare you say that it's made out of soot and it's not vegetarian? They use fish scales, and you know, Arthur Guinness was a notorious anti-Catholic who saw himself as British and not Irish, and it's the you know, that kind of thing." And I've been to the Guinness brewery in Dublin, and I've gone to the top of that building like Muhammad went to the top, like Moses went to the top of the feckin' mountain, Mount Sinai, and brought back the 10 Commandments. That happened to me at the Guinness Visitor Centre. How dare you? How dare you tell me that Guinness is not some kind of sainted? You know, that would be a funny one to do. What was his name? No, that show Through the Keyhole. That's something I should do in some later episodes of the Velocity of Now, and the comedy sketch. You'd have that used to be a show on that used to be on the daytime with what's his name? David Frost. You know, the guy who interviewed Nixon. That guy, and Lloyd Grossman, the guy who makes, you know, sauces like that guy, and I should call it Through the Arsehole or something like that. And that would be funny. That's a good one. I should do that. You know, who would live in a place like this? Yeah. Mr. Grossman. Now then. Oh, I definitely have to do that. I could have a lot of fun with that. But, yeah, you didn't like the Guinness stuff. Well, now I'm going to double compound your horror as we approach St. Patrick's Day by telling you about something. Well, it's really quite, it's revolting, right? Arthur Guinness and whatever Guinness have done, they are sainted. They are innocent flowers compared to the Jameson story. And you won't believe that one, okay? Now, before I get to it, I have a personal family history with the Jameson distilleries in the north side of Dublin, Bow Lane, and Marrowbone Lane, and around Smithfield. The distilleries were absolutely massive and gigantic. My grandfather worked there for 30 years until he had to take an early retirement at 50-something because he'd lost a finger when something fell on him, and they gave him a few quid, and then they threw him out. His father worked there for 50 years, so 80 years in the same distillery, and because they were both Catholics, they could only get the crap jobs there. At Jameson, like Guinness, the Catholics did not get the good jobs. The Dublin, although it's in the south of Ireland, was still very much Anglo-centric up until I was even a kid. And both of their jobs were, and you would not believe this, there used to be gigantic barns, or kind of like warehouses, massive things. And the floors were all covered in whatever they make whiskey from, barley, or I don't know what they make whiskey from. But their job was, I'm not kidding, for 50 years and 30 years to walk up and down these long halls with a rake, turning the grain over, going to the end, and coming back. That was the only jobs that you could get at Jameson if you were Catholic. And that's because sectarianism was rife even in Dublin up until the 60s. Against, you know, the establishment were very much Anglo-Irish Presbyterian. Now, it wasn't always like that's, you know, but that's, you know, there was still a lot of the old companies that functioned like that. And so I have a personal history in that. So I don't drink whiskey anyway. It just doesn't sit well with me. I don't like whiskey, and so I'm, you know, it's not something I can take inside it doesn't agree with my constitution, as they say. But the next story, I wanted to a good bit to it. So, Paul, if you're listening here on www.realitybytesradio.com, which is the hosting station, the wonderful hosting station for this program, if you could put on the first song, well, because I want to get to the next story, next part of the Jemison horror, uninterrupted. If you could do that, please. And this is Armageddon Time by The Clash. And that was Armageddon Time by The Clash. Now, I've got so much to go through tonight, I hope I can squeeze it in, but this next story is from a website called theintuition.eu, and it's about John Jemison, who was the heir to... James S. Jemison, who was the heir to the Jemison whiskey family. Now, the family originally came to Ireland from Scotland, and they were part of the same... They were like the kind of Wedgwoods of whiskey brewing. They came from the Stein and the Haig families. Powerful. They basically invented the whiskey business, to be honest. Now, this story I'm going to tell you now is quite disturbing, so it's probably not good for there's children in the room or anything like that, if they are, or even if you're a bit squeamish. But this talks about a story that was covered in the New York Times in 1890 called The Horrible Jemison Affair. And it kind of, even though at the beginning of the show I'd mentioned about the whole thing of well, we'll talk about this later, but I'll just read the story. But it kind of does validate a lot of the, shall we say, speculation about the aristocrats and their obsession with child murder and things like that. The Horrible Jemison Affair refers to the allegations that a fast-living colonialist for hire and heir to the whiskey distilling empire, James S. Jemison, procured a girl solely to watch her being eaten. The accusations were made in 1890, 2 years after the alleged incident. James S. Jemison was the heir to the Jemison Irish whiskey giant. His account of the time in the rear column was published posthumously by his wife and brother in an attempt to combat charges of disobedience, disloyalty, forgetfulness of promises, desertion, cruelty, cowardice, and even murder levelled at him by Sir Henry Morton Stanley. Asad Farran was a Syrian translator who accompanied Jemison on his journey with Tipu Tip. It was Farran who made the contentious and inflammatory disposition against Jemison. Bart Telot was an officer colleague of Jemison, left in command of the rear column in Yambuya in the modern-day Democratic Republic of Congo. Bart Telot would eventually be shot as he attempted to strike a woman. At the same time, Jemison died of fever elsewhere. Tipu Tip was a notorious blind slave trader, plantation owner and governor who worked for a succession of sultans of Zanzibar. He rose to prominence through his ruthlessness and would eventually become a very wealthy and very powerful. By all accounts, he was a man to be feared. You can already tell this is kind of like a very dark circle we're going into now of Victorian aristocrats. Emin Pasha was a true 19th century country gentleman, virtually the paradigm of Jules Verne character. A German doctor and naturalist, he was appointed the governor of Equatoria, but he had become besieged after the fall of Sudan. Sir Henry Morton Stanley, of the Dr. Livingstone fame, was in the employment of King Leopold of Belgium to install a Belgian colony in the Free State. Stanley was one of the leaders of the expedition to rescue Emin Pasha. Now, we could go and talk about Belgium, but Belgium hadn't been around that long. It had basically been invented by the British Empire as a kind of shall we say, a Switzerland of the Northeast, which it still is to this day, for globalist purposes. And the Belgian royal family was basically a subset of the British royal family that was moved to Belgium to create this artificial dynasty. So one of the few details of the episode that would be uncontested was the start of the affair. Jemison found himself with Tipu Tip and his translator Asad Farran at Riba Kiba. Depending on the source, place names was a flexible phonicization of the vernacular. There's several ways you can pronounce that. Now known as Loch Kandu, it is a township in the Democratic Republic of Congo that sits on at the virtual centre of Africa. At the time, Rikabikaba was a trading stop on the Lualaba River, a headstream of the Congo River, that is. The town was a major stop in slave and ivory trade routes. So that sounds, you can tell it's a dark energy, a dark, malignant energy there already. A lawless frontier town. The men were looking for porters, of which they would eventually get 400. The men were part of the Imam Pasha relief expedition. The expedition's stated aim was to relieve the besieged Imam Pasha. It was really an expeditionary foray, masterminded by the Belgian royalty and employing cooperative Europeans in an exploratory journey into the heart of darkest Africa. King Leopold was suffering from regal anxiety and had decided he needed vast swathes of sub-Saharan real estate to allow him to compete with other European monarchs. Well, he was really British, so this would have ultimately went to the Saxe, Coburg and Gothas, Battenbergs and the Hessens and the Hanoverians in London. The men were to evaluate the lands. Jemison and Barthelot had been left in command of the expedition's rear column, something they failed to do in spectacular fashion. When Sir Henry Morton Stanley returned to review the joint command, he found only 60 of the 270 men still fit to serve. The camp's conditions were described in all the pressing details by Farran in his later affidavit. Now, we're looking at a psychopath here. This is a serious... We're looking at this guy Jemison as a hardcore psychopath already. The fact that he would show no decent treatment or have any kind of good organisational, administrative or logistic skills for the men under his duty. Barthelot and Jemison claimed they were hampered in their duties by lack of Belgian steamers on the Congo. The usual story, pass it off. They said their station was remote and isolated. King Leopold had promised steamers for the expedition which had not materialised, and the expedition was forced to use boats that could be dismantled and carried. The expedition at Zanzibar for the heart of Africa on the 25th of February 1886. Farran set the scene by describing cruelty and severity at the Yambuya camp. He described the camp as having to split into factions in an indictment of laissez-faire attitudes adopted by the camp commanders. Farran recounted how at Rib-a-Kabia, Jemison had said to him that he was curious about the practice of cannibalism. This is where it gets dark, so brace yourself for this stuff. Which he believed was a common among the natives. Apparently he was correct. It was relatively common. Jemison wanted to see it performed and decided to buy a slave for the purpose. Just business. He paid 6 handkerchiefs for a 10-year-old girl. The detail would later stand out as essentially correct and uncontested. Along with a group of men, brought her to the cannibal's hut. Through the interpreter, the men were told, "This is a present from the white man who wishes to see her eaten." The girl was tied to a tree and her belly gouged twice with a knife. She looked around for assistance from the hostile group surrounding her. The girl remained silent as blood gushed from her abdomen. She was resigned to her fate. When dead from the blood loss, she was cut into pieces by the men who had sharpened their knives nearby. Farran told how Jemison drew and sketched throughout the entire ordeal. Jemison, he said later, rendered these sketches in 6 delicate watercolours. The girl being led away, it's so typically, psychopathic imperialism, a young girl 10 years old being butchered to be eaten, and Jemison renders it in 6 delicate watercolours. Oh, this is my time in the Belgian Congo, and this is a time that I paid for 6 handkerchiefs for a young girl to be eaten, and so I could sketch away. This is literally how this psychopath was thinking, and this is how these psychopaths are. The stabbing and gushing blood, the dissection, and the final butchery, Jemison displayed his works to the chiefs for their approval. A letter from Jemison appeared in the New York Times on the 15th of November 1890. His defence was made posthumously through his wife's correspondent with the newspaper and consisted of a letter Jemison had written to Sir William Mackinnon. The letter had been composed as Jemison was dying at Stanley Falls, August 3rd, 1888. Strangely, it deals with minor details and accusations which only come to light 2 years later in Farran's affidavit, which led some credibility to the accusations. Jemison described how he brought to the local chief's house where a cannibalistic ceremony was already in progress. Jemison was told by Tipu that he would witness cannibalism. Jemison replied in the negative, said it was impossible and he did not wish to believe it might happen. Liar. Tipu had said, pushed the point and asked for 6 handkerchiefs so they might prove him wrong. At this point, Jemison concedes he did provide the handkerchiefs. They would lead anyone to wonder why he had such items, or why he went to lengths to procure and provide the payment that would secure a girl's death. A debt, he claims, he was averse to. At any rate, all tellings of the story collaborate that the girl's life was worth a mere 6 handkerchiefs. Jemison said, "It all happened too quick to sketch. Had he wanted to," which he goes on to restate, "he didn't because he was shocked. The lady doubt protests too much, methinks." I agree with the author of this blog. You know what they say? The truth is obvious. A lie takes a story, takes an epic, and we're getting a classic case of this here. Jemison then wanted to accuse Assad of fraud and camel dealings in a thinly veiled and feeble attempt at character assassination. Well, that's the classic psychopath for you. You know, they don't admit it or say anything. They distract. They project to somebody else. So he went after this guy Assad to try and distract from his own thing. That's a classic psychopath thing. They never say, "I'm guilty" or "I'm innocent." They say, "That guy over there is worse than me." That's how a psychopath does it. Both sides had much to gain and lose. On balance of probability, there may have been some truth in the accusations, particularly in light of Stanley's portrayal as Jemison as a disdainful character. Congo of the time was a dangerous and unstable place. The Luba kingdom arose in the 16th century and eventually fell victim to the European expansionism in the late 19th century. This was darkest Africa, a continent of myth, legend and heroism, full of danger, both animal and human, a land that might swallow up the unprepared. It was seen as a dangerous land beyond the reach of law. Sadly, these tales appear to have more than a grain of truth to them, but much of this barbarism and intrigue was of European origin, or at least in support of colonial aims. Jemison certainly seems to have acted in this cavalier manner, according to many witnesses. Assad was later ordered by Sir Francis de Winton to sign a declaration that the story was untrue. De Winton was the Administrator General of the Belgian Congo and a secretary of Emin Pasha relief expedition, a man who had much to lose if it was believed that men were supporting cannibalism under his watch. Any story was possibly true. I believe that this story is true. This is what happens when you have a psychopath in a powerful, wealthy family. There's no limits on their pathology, on their petitioner. It does not exist, and so they think nothing of it. It shows how this is how they see their servants. They don't see other. You see, it's very easy for us to say, "Oh, it's because she was a poor African girl. She wasn't a full human to him." But look at the early part of the story of how he treated the men under his. These would have been European men mostly, Belgian and British troops under his command in the rear column of the expeditionary force, and they were left in chaos. The whole thing fell apart. He didn't care about them either. This is how the Anglo-Prussian, Anglo-elite crackers with the captain living in palaces. This is how they are. They don't care about. They think that everyone that's not one of them is a subhuman and is disposable. Now, why are the elites and the wealth and the wealthy and the super wealthy obsessed with cannibalism? Why is Dracula always a noble? It's because they see human beings that are not of the elite, the ones who work their farms, their peasants. They see them in the same way as their cattle and their livestock. They dehumanize them. So eventually they go, a cow is food, a lamb is food, a fish is food, and these humans on my estate, they're also food, subconsciously. They see it the same way. It's not that they have empathy or against people or for people or compassion of the other human beings, because they don't see them. And this is why I will always make it, you know me, I'm not Mr. sort of hysterical. I don't jump on every conspiracy, but I do believe that unchecked, these aristocrats, the likes of Bill Gates, these super rich types, when you have someone like Tony Blair and George Bush saying they started the Iraq II war because they got messages from God, from Jesus Christ. That's them telling you that they see themselves as gods upon this earth. That's what they're telling you. And if we didn't constantly fight for our rights and fight for our dignity, they would be eating us. They would be eating us. They'd be starting with the children, they'd be eating us. Now, I want to read another article here about aristocratic privilege and murder and blood. And this is from my own blog, which you can get to from thomassheridanarts.com. You just click the link saying official blog, and it takes you this. But the article anyway, I'll post it in the topic section of newsymbolsmedia.tv. I'm sorry, I'm just so upset about reading that story, but we have to confront these things. It's important to know what kind of monsters are running this world. And this is from my own blog. The most prolific psychopathic female serial killer in history was a lady of the nobility. In later years, she would become known as Countess Dracula. However, in her heyday of aristocratic murder and sacrifice, she was known as Countess Elizabeth Bathory d'Esquest, a blood-drinking aristocrat who left a legacy of murder and horror in the Kingdom of Hungary between 1560 and 1641. During her lifetime, her reputation caused her to become known as the Blood Countess. At first, her victims tended to be local peasant girls. See what I was saying about they're just livestock? And from this, she began killing servants and the maids of the court. Again, just livestock. She is also accused of murdering the daughters of rivals and less prestigious nobility. Less prestigious nobility is the factor here. During the investigation into her activities, it was revealed that there existed a secret network, just like we had today with Savile and the royal family, from Vienna to Belgrade, which captured and supplied her with young girls. Witnesses stated in her posthumous trial, just like the other guy, Jemison, it's always posthumous. They're never found. These super elites are never found guilty in their own life, just like Savile. This almost proves to me that Savile was royalty and the Duchess was a duchess. Was stated in her posthumous trial that the victims' bodies were generally buried in local graveyards. Following the death of her husband, the Countess and several royal collaborators began amassing victims, which by some estimates reached over 6,000 young girls and women. This is one woman who did this now. One aristocratic woman, psychopath. She was never formally charged, tried, nor convicted for her horrific crimes during her lifetime. However, she did remain under house arrest for the last 4 years of her life. A proper investigation into her crimes was not conducted until long after her death, and some of the testimonies and accusations were unfathomable in terms of the sheer pravity, which included taking baths in the blood of virgins she and her collaborators had kidnapped and murdered. In Hungary and Slovakia for centuries afterward, Countess Elizabeth Bathory presence looms large in the collective folklore. There is also speculation that the extent of her horrors could have been sexed up, to use a modern term, as part of a Reformation propaganda that would have been between Catholics and Protestants. In this case, Protestants against Catholics. But even if the numbers of murders are exaggerated, and bear in mind they could be accurate too, she was by all accounts a vicious serial killer nonetheless. Of course, royalty and nobility's taste for human flesh is hardly restricted to Eastern Europe. British royalty for centuries have dined on human flesh and used everything from powdered human skulls, at one time human skulls for consumption were one of Ireland's largest exports to the UK, to England, sorry, not the UK, to the organs of executed prisoners being ingested for alleged medical, sexual and life-enhancing benefits. Dr. Richard Sugg's book, Mummies, Cannibals and Vampires, is an excellent insight into the cannibalistic dietary practice of Darwin's favoured races. So you see, I'm having a lot more time and a lot more understanding for people who talk about the elites and cannibalism and rampant sexuality on children and all this kind of thing, because the historic evidence does support that there's something going on there. Now, another story that came to me tonight, somebody sent it to me, and I'd never heard of this one before. And I'll post a wiki article into newsymbolsmedia.com, but it's worth reading this article just because of the horrific conditions in which Barcelona, the city of Barcelona in the Catalan, which is now part of Spain, had, and how it was, and how awful and horrible the city was and to live in, and how desperate the lives of the people that lived there between the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. It was almost like a psychic firestorm. And this story surrounds a woman called Enriqueta Martí. She was a Catalan woman who moved to the city, and she was, again, a classic psychopath, and she lived a double life. During the day, she dressed in rags and begged at houses of charity, convents and parishes in the destitute parts of town, where she had selected children who looked the most abandoned. Taking the children by hand, she made them pass as her own children. Later, she prostituted or murdered them. She did not have any need to beg, since her double work as a procurer and a prostitute gave her sufficient money to live well. By night she dressed in luxurious clothes, hats and wigs, and attended El Liceo, the casino of the ambassadors, and other places where the wealthy of Barcelona gathered. It is probable that in these places she offered her services as a procurer of children. In 1909 of the tragic week, she was arrested in her flat in Minerva Street. That's even interesting, it was in Minerva Street, in Barcelona, accused of running a brothel that offered sexual services for children between the ages of 3 and 14 years of age. With her, a young man of a wealthy family was arrested. Thanks to her contacts with the high Barcelona society, they were contracting her services as a procurer of children. Enriqueta was never tried, and the matter of the brothel was lost in the judicial and bureaucratic system. So she's like a sabble. She's a sabble of... You see, when people say, a lot of people in the alternative scene, they go too far in saying that there's these elite networks of rich people who kill and murder and have sex with children. Well, the historic record... You see, you don't have to talk about aliens and nonsense or Crowley or any of that kind of thing. You don't have to talk about that. Just look at the actual hard, verified history. It's there. Rich, wealthy sons of bitches raping and eating the poor. At the same time she was prostituting children, she was also practicing as a witch doctor. Now wait to hear this part. The ingredients she used to make her remedies were made from the remains of children that she was killing, who ranged from infants up to children of 9 years old. So from a baby to a 9-year-old, she was killing and making ingredients, medicines from their body. From these children she used everything that she could, the fat, blood, hair and bones, which normally she crushed into powder. For this reason, she did not have problems disposing of the bodies of her victims. Enriqueta offered salves, ointment, filters, cataplasm and potions, especially to treat tuberculosis, which was highly feared at the time, and all kinds of diseases that did not have a cure in traditional medicine. Wealthy people were paying large sums of money for these remedies. Now, why are they obsessed with children? Why do they want to eat the bodies of children? Because of the age. Young children are not... They want sex with the young children, the elites, because young children don't have venereal disease. Generally, they wouldn't have VD like the regular prostitutes in Barcelona or London, New York, anywhere. That's one of the reasons. Another reason why they would want the flesh of these children to eat is because likewise they would be seen as not having suffered from tuberculosis. So the irony is, if you were a sick and unwell child on the streets of Barcelona, you probably would have survived. If you were a young, healthy child, you probably would have ended up being consumed, your body parts and your body fluids, by wealthy aristocrats. Wealthy people were paying large sums of money for these remedies, and they knew what they were. They always have. And you telling me the royal families of Britain don't do this today? It is suspected that she kidnapped an indeterminate, though large number of children. Since she operated over a span of 20 years, she was finally arrested in her flat in El Raval, in the mezzanine number 29 on Ponent Street, today Joaquim Costa Street. More evidence was found in flats in Barcelona where she'd lived previously. The forensic experts managed to differentiate a total of 12 children and what little evidence they were able to recover. In spite of suspicions, and because of Enrique did not tally her activities, experts are unsure if she was the deadliest killer that ever existed in Spain. It is clear that she acted for many years in Barcelona. Additionally, the public suspected that someone was kidnapping babies. There were many children who disappeared without a trace, and there was dread among the population. So, again, you know, we can laugh at all the people in the alternative movement who talk about the stuff that go on with children. But remember, these people in Barcelona, these poor people in Barcelona would have been saying, there's rich people taking our children and having sex and killing them and eating them. And they would have been laughed at as the batshit crazy kooks of their day. But it still was happening. Now the occult aspects I want to talk about briefly before the top of the hour and we get into the second part of the show. The occult aspects, I hear an awful lot of people in this movement talk about, oh, it's all Crowley. Crowley's the one they all follow. I completely disagree with that. I don't think they're into it at Crowley at all. I know a lot about ritual magic. I've been called a witch in my lifetime, something I'm actually proud of. And I've never been a member of a magic circle, but I do know quite a lot about it. And I can tell you for a fact, whatever the elites practice in these stately homes, it is not Thelema. It is not any Crowley stuff. It's not. Crowley was the quite opposite of an aristocrat. In fact, he lived very modest. He had nothing on his life, and he lived in absolute poverty. And that's because he believed that a minimalization of your living existence, like the whole idea of living in a minimal space with less stuff, less distractions, allowed you to contain energy that was needed for magical rituals. So, and you had like lots of bling, lived in a large home with lots of paintings and jewels and stuff like that. You could not practice the Thelema in the Crowley sense because you could not harvest that energy because your objects steal your energy. That's why things like Black Friday and shopping malls are really a kind of a black magic magnet. They're sucking the energy out of the people who go to these places, energy they need for themselves to do. Not just about magic, but they need that energy to fight diseases and things like that. They need that energy to think straight and not vote for idiot politicians. I absolutely believe that the elites, the super elites, are involved in some kind of ritual magic sorcery. We've been given hints of it. The nearest I can attain to it is that it has something to do with sex magic. It's very sexually orientated, and it has something to do with drugs and alcohol. There seems to be a common theme in this aristocratic cult. It's based on drugs, alcohol, sex in large homes. And there's a reason for that too as well. We'll get to in a second. And it involves cannibalism, and it involves children. And what it is, how they go about it, I don't know. But those factors seem to always be present. If you watch Eyes Wide Shut by Kubrick, he shows the girl who almost dies from taking the naked girl, beautiful naked girl in the room, who almost dies from taking drugs. He's telling us that's what goes on with these things: sex and drugs and children. Now, they're definitely doing something. It started in Prussia about 200 years ago, and it still goes on. And what kind of magic it is, I don't know, but it's absolutely not Crowley. Crowley is overrated in terms of his influence, shall we say, on the elites. In fact, there's nothing in the elites that you can find that relates back to Crowley. Nothing. None of it. If you really look, there's nothing there. Now, if you were to ask me, what is the main, shall we say, indicator that these rituals are going on, I would say longevity. I would say longevity. It was known among the shoguns in Japan that having sex with younger and younger women and boys did extend life. This is also why in the Islamic world they have younger and younger brides. I'm not putting down Muslims, I'm just saying that's what that originally came from. That was a pre-Islamic idea of the young 8 and 9-year-old bride that came from Zoroastrianism and various other Persian sects, sects, that did the same. Look for people who live a long time, both at the top echelon of big business, politics, and royalty, and seem to be fairly fit. I would reckon that they're involved in this occult aspect that these people are involved in. Now, what is magic? I keep telling you, magic is not necessarily supernatural beings and supernatural. It's the changing of consciousness. It's the changing and the conforming of others with your will. If you can train yourself to do this, as I always tell you, the easy way is black magic, and that's why black magic is so popular. The dark shit, the dark stuff, sorry, I shouldn't have cursed them, the dark stuff, this is the path to extreme energy. This is the part to, now this is energy, think about energy. It's these people become, even if they're not psychopathic, proto-psychopathic, this is the rush that psychopaths get when they kill somebody. What did Ted Bundy say? When I see the life going out of somebody, I feel like God. There's almost a transfer of the energy into the black magician or the person involved in this depravity. This is what keeps them filled with adrenaline. This is what keeps them filled with dopamine. And adrenaline keeps you young. It keeps you fit. Also, testosterone levels are increased, and so is melanin, which is in the reptilian cortex of the brain, and the color of it is blue blood, and surges of norepinephrine, the stress hormone that triggers this as well, and they're in a constant state of hypervigilism, hypertension, but not out of a fear-based thing, and it keeps them younger longer. Their hearts beat better, their physiology works better, their neurology works better. So look for the ones who are really, really old and seem to be in excellent shape. And we go to the next song, which is ironically by the Chameleons, and it's titled Less. And welcome back to the second hour of The Velocity of Now with me, Thomas Sheridan. My website is www.thomassheridanarts.com. I hope you're enjoying the show tonight. I'm getting wonderful feedback from everyone. If you want to support me and my work, you can do great by going to my website, thomassheridanarts.com, clicking on the bookshop tab at the top, up at the upper right, and buying a book or two. Please buy the books if you can from those sources, because I would get the best cut from them. And also, they're not Amazon. And Amazon, as you know, as I've told you in previous shows of the old series on Type 1, that it's owned by the CIA, or it's working with the CIA, claim it, and big business deal with them. And Amazon also do things like they destroy the commercial viability of up-and-coming authors by doing really disgusting things like giving away the Kindle versions of their books for free. Why do you think they call it Kindle Fire? That's burn books. So that would really help me if you could do that. I'm currently working on flying into the second part of Walpurgis Night, Volume 2, 1933 to 1941, and I'm really being excited by that. If you want to read the first one, again, go to the website, and you'll find it a very interesting read. Last week I did a show on the female psychopath, and it went literally viral. Everyone was fascinated by it, enjoyed it immensely, found it very useful, and I'm delighted to hear that, because I want the show to be entertaining, informative, intriguing, and useful at the same time too. And you're all very, very interested in psychopaths. It seems everybody's interested in psychopaths. But for me, it's never just been a case of the psychopath as one individual aspect of reality. It's never been a case of the psychopath being somebody's exes. You know, someone's ex, which is like why I tell people to stay away from these recovery forums. They're appalling places. There's nothing to learn about them except how to dehumanize your ex. To me, it's a far deeper and far more expansive, and it's even a spiritual thing and so on. Tonight, in the second hour, I want to talk about the robotic psychopath. This is a particular type of psychopath that's sometimes confused with having Asperger's or autistic. But remember, people who have Asperger's or autistic, they're not pathologically driven. They don't plan. They don't make plans. And they certainly don't have duper's delight and smirk when they get their own way. There is a type of psychopath who's already ready to go into a robot. They're literally, you could take them from the human body and put them into HAL. That was the message of Kubrick's 2001, that HAL was the techno-electronic psychopath. You could take these psychopathic individuals and whatever hell of a consciousness is in there and transport it back into a machine. Now, before I get to that, I want to tell you about the robotic psychopath, because I encountered one when I worked for an investment bank, and he was very much like that. They've incredible OCD. A lot of psychopaths have OCD, but these ones, they're incredibly OCD. Everything has to fit into the boxes they were put into, and if they don't get their own way, rather than be flexible, they'll destroy you in order to keep the system going. So these psychopaths are very well thought of and procured by big companies like Apple and Microsoft and probably Amazon and all the big corporations which need robots that are cold but also ruthless. Last week I got this letter from a woman, we'll call her Jane, and she wrote this letter to me, and I want to read it to you because we can learn a lot from this, and it's a good intro into the second hour of the show, which is, as usual, is flying by. Dear Thomas, I want to thank you for sharing your perspective on psychopaths. I've come a long way in my recovery from my experience with a person that I later learned had some very psychopathic traits. At the very least, bordering on narcissistic personality disorder, and at the very most, a low-level functioning psychopath with amazing self-control and an intense need to fit in and be a good and likable guy. But I don't know if you ever fully become the person you were before you open yourself up to a person like this. I found listening to you speak on the subject has been very comforting, and it gives me extra foundation and validity to my feelings and experiences. I'm glad that when people tell me that, because that's really what I want to do the most, is help people recover. That's why I wrote the book Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of Psychopath. It's as much a survival manual and a recovery manual, but in a sensible, grown-up sense. It's not about hate or anything like that. And I'm delighted to hear this person say this. So to put it into context, I met my first and only love right out of high school. This person was my best friend. We were both kind of misfits and just got on well with each other. And we loved each other's company, perhaps too much. I'd say it eventually became a kind of codependency. This guy had severe childhood trauma and anger issues that slowly emerged over the years. It turned into a violent, chaotic, and abusive relationship that ended finally after 11 years with suicide. He shot himself in our house while I was at home, and I was sad about it, but more relieved to be free from his hell, and I didn't want to take it with me. I don't think I ever properly grieved. That's quite understandable in those kinds of cases. Often when a person is someone like that guy, you know that they're probably never going to get better, and they're only going to have a tortured life and torture everyone around them. So I understand where the woman is coming from. It's not that she lacks empathy. It's kind of understandable. Within a month, I met my psychopath. As you can imagine, I was a prime target. See, she was already softened up by a proto-psychopath. I knew I needed time to myself and wasn't even interested, but he was gentle-mannered and nice and safe, and we were all in the same group of friends that always hung around. So he was always kind of there. He was kind of a nerdy guy, but he kind of grew on me. His ex-sister's wife happened to be a friend of mine, and she warned me that he preyed on vulnerable women. You see, the nerdy thing is to break down the thing. I'm harmless. I have an avatar on my forum of a little boy and a teddy bear on a bed. That means you can trust me. That's why a lot of them work in IT, these types. So he was the nerdy thing was just purely a front to make people bring their guard down. He had left his ex for a woman with dissociative identity disorder. He seemed like such a gentle, mild-mannered guy. I just couldn't imagine that he was this jerk my friend claimed. Another mutual friend claimed that he needed to be a knight in shining armor. That's another one. The psychopaths have a hero complex. They want to rescue. They have a photograph of them in a fireman's outfit as a part-time fireman or volunteer fireman. That'll be on their Facebook page, putting a fire. They're rescuers. He told me that he maybe had what might be considered an abusive childhood. That means he's lying, he didn't. He had a stepdad that spanked and scolded him a lot. But he then said that he was a bad kid and he deserved it too. Busting windows out of abandoned buildings, stealing sunglasses from a store. He said that his mum was emotionally weak and would abandon him to chase after the stepdad or lock herself in the bathroom threatening to slice her wrist with a razor. You see, these are always usually lies, these stories. This is also like to make you feel sorry for them or to excuse early sort of outbursts or where the mask comes down. After my own experience, I seriously questioned the level of truth to his perspective. He was taken in by other people, mostly Christians, I gather, probably from the church his mum went to in their little town. I don't know about his Christian values, but he is a devout conservative who worships Sean Hannity. This guy is a very absolute type of person. Everything was black and white and belonged in precise little boxes with precise little labels precisely describing the contents. This is the robotic psychopath coming in now. It's extreme anal retentiveness, extreme OCD, but it's none of those things. It's all about absolute control. It's ultimately a form of conformity gaslighting. You understand? Where everything is so utterly conformed, the person is gaslighted by this fear of this stress, this trauma of potentially putting this conformity gaslighting out of structure. There are no shades of grey, no other perspectives to consider. He's a computer software engineer. It's very common, or an IT help desk guy. This is why MIT, there's lots of them in places like MIT. He also into music theory and quantum physics, or so he says. He never talked in depth about the subject, just a basic knowledge of what it is. That's typical as well. He plays the guitar and was singing in a band. I doubt it was so much because of a passion of his, but because he needs constant positive strokes for his fragile and overinflated ego. It's not fragile. She's making a mistake there. It's big ego. Also, the reason he spent most of the evenings at the bar playing pool and trying to be better than everyone else. He told me once that he regretted that other people couldn't appreciate what he does as a programmer, that they couldn't see how great he is at it, because most people don't know computer programming. And he loved debating, not to be right, but debate to win. He had a facial twitch. To me, it felt as if he was always nervous, even during casual interactions with people, like he was having to put up a front and it was stressful. Well, he wasn't he was putting up a persona. It's not easy even for them, even for psychopaths. It was worse when he was mad. Usually he only got mad when you confronted him with the truth or shed a negative light on him in any way. There you go. Unfortunately, his anger was never explosive, always pretty mellow, but he was also able to turn everything upside down and make you feel like there was something wrong with you for coming to your observation conclusion perspective. That's the gaslighting. He also put me down a lot, this the passive aggression, and she's always in a passive aggressive way, that he could fall back on that. He was just giving an honest opinion. After what I went through, I needed a lot of support and reassurance. When I shared my insecurities, he was great at giving me an answer that intensified my concerns rather than helped to alleviate them. I had told him sometimes when I was upset with the way things were that he seemed like a robot or a Vulcan with no emotions. He would say that that would hurt it. He would say that she made a mistake here, that his feelings were hurt. I would just think to myself, what feelings? You don't have any. He took advantage of my kind, trusting and giving nature quite a bit. He owed me a lot of money when we finally split and denied that he could possibly be half of what I thought it should come to. Again, they always rob money off people. And then I had to fight him tooth and nail for years to get him to make a small monthly payment of the lesser amounts he agreed to. The ultimate parasite. See, and he's making all this money as a programmer. That's the amazing thing too. Where does all that money go? The whole thing was on gaslighting. Yes, that happened to me a lot, mostly twisting reality to make nothing his fault, and if fault must lay somewhere else, it must be mine. He apologized 3 times in the 7 years I knew him. One time he said he was sorry. I felt the way I did. See, that's a classic. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you feel the way you did. That's how a psychopath says, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. That's terrible what I've done. I'm sorry you feel that way. That's a classic psychopath one. When we broke up, he was sorry that I was the one who had to leave. And I can't even remember the other right now, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't sorry he'd done something wrong. I left that relation with post-traumatic stress injury from the previous trauma, flaring full blast, no self-esteem, self-respect, self-trust, or trust in anyone else. That's very common to be in that situation. Up and down, wrong, up was down, right was wrong, black was white, and I didn't trust my own instinct. That was from the gaslighting. I questioned every thought and feeling that I had. It took a long time to recover. It usually takes about 2 years. When I ran across the definition of a psychopath, I was instantly, oh my God, that explains everything. The more I learned, the more I've been able to regain my validation that I lost and begin to trust my own perspective on the world again. I've learned to treat him just as I've been told one should deal with these types. I mostly pretend he doesn't exist, even if I'm in the same room. But if I'm forced into eye contact or any type of interaction, I'm sure to look down my nose and treat him like he is nothing more than a dog crap stuck at the bottom of my boots. Thankfully, I mostly never see him at all. That's good advice for anyone who's in a psychopathic relationship with someone in a family or in a social circle like she is. That's the way to treat them, like they don't exist. Just business. Just be very cold, a matter of fact. I tell you though, this guy does not fit the definition to a T, and this made everything so much harder to grasp. I never felt like he loved me. I don't know if he ever liked me. He didn't like my family or my pets or my ideas or my tastes, my dreams, etc., etc. But he picked out a puppy and brought her home. I was just to buy her. When she got hit by a car, he was worried, and when she died, he cried. That's because he had no other way of manipulating her. When his mother was dying in the hospital, his sister had to bitch at him to go see her because he was at the bar playing poker to avoid the situation. He wasn't. He just didn't care. But then I'm sure at the funeral, he was probably like Mr. like convulsive screamer. And he keeps his friends. She goes on talking about the only friends he has are the people he can use. Everything's very superficial, very black and white, very robotic. There's nothing there. And that was the letter she sent me. And it goes on a bit more, but that's basically it. So he was a robot that was only good at gaslighting and manipulation. So that's the psychopath to look out for, the robotic psychopath. Now, don't be confusing someone who has autism or Asperger's syndrome with these, because those types don't generally plan. They don't plan things. These types do. Now, how does this tie up with transhumanism and computers and everything else? Okay, this is a long story. Let me tell you a long story. When radio broadcast technology was first invented and created and developed a century ago, almost instantaneously, the top scientists in the field, including Tesla and Alexander Graham Bell and Edison, wanted to use their machines to contact spirits. There was a belief, because spiritualism was very big at the time, there was a belief, and it's quite understandable, because radio existed in a domain outside human speech. It was invisible on what in between the time the message was sent and received, between transmission and receiver, that voice was somewhere in the ether, in the atmosphere, in another dimension, which is quite possibly true, because radio frequencies and radio waves were still not fully understood at the time. So the belief came to be that if my voice, when I speak into a microphone, before it reaches the transmitter, somebody somewhere outside this dimension or this in the ether may be able to hear it, and perhaps it's the spirits of our long departed loved ones. Not the stupidest idea in the world if you believe in life after death, which just about everyone did back then. So the signal would be sent out, and then someone's had the idea, well, why don't we see if the spirits can be brought in on the carrier wave that the voice is sent with and received. And so many of the early developments, the BBC did a fabulous documentary which has never been rebroadcast or uploaded anyway, about 10 years ago or 12 years ago on this subject. The early days of radio was built on trying to contact what they called spirits. Now, spirits it's a very interesting term. Are they the dead? Are they what the Islamic people call the jinn? Are they demons? We don't know. Are they us operating in another function outside our physical matter? I don't know. But this is what they wanted to do. They created things called spirit phones. They created all kinds of devices to try and contact the dead. There was even not necessarily vocal ones, but they would have things like a piece of foil in a sealed vacuum tube on a small pivot. And they would say things like, if there is a spirit out there, can you make yourself known by moving the piece of gold foil inside this sealed jar? And sometimes the gold foil would move. And from this they would develop a kind of a semaphore. Just like the Ouija board. The Ouija board, I should say. Now we all know what is on the other side of the Ouija board. On the other side of the Ouija board is Pazuzu, the Babylonian demon of disease and the wind. This has been long known that Pazuzu is on the other side. Whatever Pazuzu is on the other side of the Ouija board. At the very least, if you're to go into a materialist construct, on the other side of the board giving you the messages is your own pathological lower forms of your cognitive functioning telling yourself lies, a kind of a spiritualist dissociative identity phenomena. This might explain why individuals who use the Ouija board become vicious, insane, paranoia, murderous, and often end up in psychiatric hospitals committed for the rest of their lives. They're unable to get back into this world. I tend to go with the idea that whatever Pazuzu is probably behind there. I also believe these early developments, this rush towards contacting spirits, was not a one-way project. I don't believe that it was merely human scientists on this side of the reality trying to contact beings on the other. I believe that the ones on the other side were trying to contact this side too. Why? Well, let's look at folklore. If you look at the jinn, the Irish concept of the fairies, the Nordic concept of goblins, trolls, elves, the Nagas of the Vedic text, and on and on and on, the determining factor is a pathological hatred of human beings and a desire and an envy of the world that human beings live in. In the Irish canon of folklore, there are numerous stories of farmers going into the fairy world, or people in the countryside entering the fairylands. This was not just superstitious peasants talking about this, but the intellectual minds of the Victorian age were talking about this. And when people came back from the fairyland in the Gaelic tradition, they always described it as being a dump. Everything was it was an awful reality. Everything was messy and dirty. And our reality on this earth was a paradise. In the Islamic tradition, the jinn idea is the same, that where the jinn live is usually associated with dark, damp, miserable and cold places, caves and so on, graveyards. In the Babylonian demons, they live in graveyards and places like that. That's why even in Iraq to this day, people put curses on other people by making talismans and putting them in the most run-down and forgotten graveyard. I know a graveyard here in Ireland, a place called Tulsk. And if this graveyard isn't hosting demons, I don't know what does. I've got an article on my website, I'll link in that, where I took photographs. The graveyard is absolutely like something out of the demon world. Wrecked church and everything, covered in moss. And this is how they describe them. This is where the Babylonians believed that these demons lived. As if these areas of decrepitness, just like Barcelona in the late 1800s, allows these pathological entities to enter into this reality. The more degraded we become, the more we lose our own humanity. The other side, the other ones, whatever they are, find it easier to get into this reality. Then we take it to the next level. We move to television. What has been the trajectory of television since its invention? To increasingly move towards depravity. In the early days of television, people watched Milton Berle and family shows. They watched Doris Day. They watched rather innocent shows like Pinky and Perky on the BBC, Blue Peter, all these innocent family shows. What do we have on TV now? Big Brother, The Jersey Shore, and God knows it probably gets even worse. Jeremy Kyle, process is towards depravity. So when you watch TV, we're increasingly moving towards an electromagnetic version of Barcelona in the late 19th century. Is this allowing TV to degrade us to the point where these spirits on the other side can jump into us and operate us like a robot? I don't know. I'm a Fortean. I ask these questions. I don't deliver absolute answers. I ponder them. But I think they're important questions because how we react to them tells us a lot about our psychology. And now we live in the digital age, the age of the internet, where even the communication across the electromagnetic spectrum has gone from a graceful sine wave into a cold, hard function of noughts or zeros and one binary code. Switches on and off. Not the natural and beautiful flux of the sine wave or the electromagnetic frequency of the universe, but a robotic click on, click off. It's almost as if we have developed digital electronics to create the electromagnetic psychopath. Every day, all over the world, we have people pouring their emotions into the internet. They're falling in love with people they only know from an email, based on the zeros and ones that appear on their computer screen in the form of text, pictures, or smileys. We have people pouring their hatreds into it, reading stories or watching videos where two kids are being coached to make up lies about dancing on the skulls of babies or cannibalism at McDonald's. And they pour their emotions and disgust into it. You have people masturbating to pornography and ejaculating and pouring all their sex energy into the picture of probably a dead junkie on some pornographic site. Do you think that energy is not doing something? I'm not so sure. I want to know where that energy is going. We're talking of hundreds of millions of people every day now doing this, pouring their emotions into the digital binary code of the virtual electromagnetic spectrum. We are now moving towards quantum computing. How many times have we heard that human beings are quantum computers? So all this emotion and all this energy and all this will is poured into this thing called the World Wide Web, which was released by CERN on Walpurgis night, 1992, I think it was, April 30th, which is weird enough by itself. At what point does enough human consciousness, intent, emotion, psychology, sexuality, and will is forced into the internet to the point where it becomes a conscious being all by itself? That we create a tulpa, a thought form. Are we being led when you see somebody walking down the street hypnotized, gangs of people at parties, at sports events, at concerts, holding up their mobile devices, their iPods, their Androids, their iPads, everywhere? If they're not looking at them during these events, they're filming them. Everything's pouring into it. Into a system now increasingly controlled by something called cloud software. Cloud, interesting one, that cloud. What do they call the jinn? Beings of smokeless fire. It's dark. It's frightening. And yet nobody stops to say, hold on a second. There's people like Aaron Franz at his Age of Transitions movie and his website and his book. One of the few voices telling us to hold on. These people are being drawn by the occult. It's not just cold hard science. You look at people at CERN when the Higgs boson thing was developed. They're like cult members. They're spellbound. They're enchanted. They're in a state of magic. You watch the Super Bowl, the same thing. Enchantment. Yes, it changes consciousness, but why? It's a two-way street. We hear a lot on this scene about things like the archons. I'm not sold on the archon idea because if you look at the canon of the archons, in the Gnostic canon, the archons were, it was basically, it meant the bureaucrats operating out of a place like Alexandria in Jerusalem. It didn't mean demons. That was something that was thrown in later on. But the general idea, the jinn, that there is other forms of and why not? Why wouldn't there be other forms of consciousness on this planet? Science hasn't got a clue what consciousness is. They're completely ignorant and clueless of it. What if these spirits do exist? What if they've gone from moving a piece of foil inside a vacuum flask in Victorian New Jersey in a science lab to running the entire internet? What if they're opening the gate? Is this possible? I don't know. Could it happen? I don't know. Should I be closed to this idea? Not at all. I want to know about everything. I want to know about every potential danger to my consciousness and to the safety of the human collective consciousness. I want to know these things. So I open my mind to them. I open my speculation to them. I did a show called Jimmy Savile, the 666 Killer, on the Type 1 radio network about 2 years ago now. And I'm telling you, there are voices all over that. When I mentioned Savile and his relationship with, shall we say, the dark side. Including one point at the end of the interview where after I was very emotional and I did a whole selection of monologue on summing up the story, and I finished with that person was Jimmy Savile, and a sound that I've never heard in my life that literally to this day when I hear it just makes my hair stand on end. We've analysed the sound and it doesn't show up on any mapping software, sound mapping software. It doesn't show a sine wave, and yet it's as loud as my voice. It makes no sense. Did I accidentally communicate with the spirits that night? I don't know. But I've been doing experiments. Told you I'm very interested in magic. There's a place near here, and I'll do a full report on this in time, called Lisheen House. Lisheen House is the ruins of a mansion where the owner was involved in the occult and brought back sarcophagi and other objects from the Middle East and Persia. And basically the house was destroyed by paranormal events. Nobody would work there anymore. And the place is still quite terrifying to be in. I did a sort of experiment. I created basically my own spirit phone a good few months ago now, and I went back a few times using a digital recorder, and a sealed jar, just like the early one. And inside a microphone at the bottom of a sigil designed to attract entities, or so I've been told it does that. And I've recorded sounds on that's on that digital recorder that's sealed inside this jar of oak and wax that I was supposed to be sealed, that I can't explain. And I do wonder if I've bitten off more than I can chew with this piece of investigation, that I don't even keep this jar in my house. I keep it in a box lined with LED flashing that you use for a roof, and I wrap it around that outside the house. I find this thing quite frightening, and I will at some point release those recordings for people to hear and make their own minds up. But it seems to answer questions. When I talk into the jar, I get an answer in a language I can't explain, in a sound that isn't human. What does it mean? I don't know. Is it me projecting my thoughts into there and it's picking up my thoughts? I don't know. It's a digital recorder with a microphone sealed inside it. The sound isn't coming from anywhere else. I don't like to just speculate on these things. I like to actually go and work on them, because that's just how I am. And I do more and more wonder if we have created the electromagnetic djinn with digital electronics, with the World Wide Web. We're embarking with Wi-Fi. We've embarked on an experiment that we don't know the consequences of. It's like Alan Moore, the magician, always says, don't declare yourself a magician without knowing what that entails. Because one day you will wake up and discover that you are a magician, and it won't be a happy experience. You'll discover through something bad. We always hear about the magic of the internet, the magic of the World Wide Web, the magic of digital electronics. Have we created a beast that we can't get away from? We all know how addictive the internet is. I have a friend who's an artist, and he's involved in a very interesting project. He creates these copper and brass mirrors, highly polished surfaces. I mean, extremely polished, to the level of a mirror and a reflecting telescope. And he shoots lights at them, and he takes high definition photographs with a very high resolution camera in the dark of these shapes that appear on these discs. So it's basically what they call scrying. Scrying is what the Golden Dawn and other magical groups did to see entities on the other side. They would use a black polished mirror with a candle on either side in the dark, very similar to the oracle that was used in ancient Greece, where they'd use water inside a bowl, inside a darkened cave with a single candle or a lantern. The Golden Dawn perfected it. They got a highly polished black obsidian mirror, candle on either side, and you sat there and you stared into the mirror until your face changed. I'm going to admit now on radio that I once did that, and somebody else started looking back at me. And I did that when I was about 23 or 24, more of an experiment, and I've never done it since because it was so frightening to me. Now we have people staring at tablets. The iPad with its black screen looks just like a scrying polished obsidian mirror. People are staring at it all the time. Are they really seeing back what we think they're seeing back, or is everyone having an individual experience with their device? I remember when I was a kid, there was kids in our street when we were very young, used to believe that their television in their house got different programs than televisions in other house. I think I used to believe that too. And you would say to your friend, there was a program on our television, this is like, back in the early 70s, that had this on it. And you wonder if that did happen, if kids were seeing something on their TV that was unique to their TV, if they were scrying on the video screen, instinctually and accidentally. Well, my friend who's polished these mirrors, I have been present, not with him when he's done these things, but he tells me, and I believe him because I know the guy well, he enters into an almost shamanic, shall we say, or heightened state to do these, to try and take these photographs, and he says he finds it very powerful. I've seen these images, both the moving video images and the photographs, and he's actually found a way to photograph the other side. I've no doubt about this. He has taken scrying to the next level. It's quite remarkable what he has done. And you look at these colours in these three-dimensional forms that begin to appear, and it's not just a simulacrum where you're seeing something. Like he even says things, look, there's a demon, there's this, there's the other. And at first you're laughing, and then you look at this thing, and the shape doesn't change radically when it turns. It maintains its anatomical structure when it's moving. And he says, I'm seeing another dimension here. And at first I was laughing, but now I think he's right. And the overwhelming sensation you get when you see these things is they want to come over here. They want to come here. And this is why I tell people to be careful about the entheogens, going down to Peru and all this stuff. It's very risky pouring an Amazonian archetype into a European consciousness. Something may go wrong, and you may find yourself becoming a robot for something else. Always you see, I find it amazing that people go down to, I went down to Peru and we did the shamanic ceremony, I took the ayahuasca, and it was a spiritual experience. And I was like, stop. Why do you always assume that it was a positive spiritual experience? Because they're not even open to the fact that they could have a horrific negative one. They're never told that. Because they cut off the money supply of trip tourists that go down for the jungles. So they all tell them to be spiritually healed by us. How do they know that that's them that come back? How do you know if you went to the Amazon and you went to your ayahuasca ceremony, how do you know that that's you that has come back? I'm serious. I know that sounds strange. Say, well, of course it's me. I know me. How do you know it's not an imposter consciousness? How do you know? You don't know that for a fact. Sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's passive. When people say, I was profoundly changed by the experience. Oh, really? How changed? Is that even you in there anymore? These are powerful and heavy questions we need to be asking about this stuff. And now we have the relationship of that stuff and the internet together. You've now got the coupling of that, people learning about entheogens via all these posh white guys who seem to be behind all this stuff, very well organized, pushing this stuff, mainstream now, and they're learning about it on the internet, so they pour that aspect of their consciousness into the internet. Then they're going down to the Amazon, and they're taking it further. They're being baited. That's what's being happening. They're being baited. They're like a fish in the ocean, and the fisherman drops a hook into the ocean with a shiny object on it, and then the herring or the mackerel swimming along and goes, ooh, shiny, 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 I must bite it. And the next thing you know, they're being fried up. Is the same thing being done with the internet pushing all these entheogens, ayahuasca and the rest? Is the same thing being done? I don't know, but it's a question I'm not afraid to ask. And let's all go down to Peru and we are so spiritual and all this stuff. Why? Why? If you can't find spirituality in your own home, where you are now, you're never going to find it anywhere else. What did Franz Kafka say? All you need to do is sit in your room in silence and the universe will dance at your feet. You don't have to pretend you're something you're not in order to have a spiritual experience. This is one of the great mythologies of the modern world. It began with the idea of the monotheistic religions from the Middle East. You had to go on a pilgrimage to the Middle East, either to Jerusalem if you were a Christian or to Mecca if you were a Muslim. Spirituality was something that existed somewhere else. Now, I have no problem with people who go to India for this stuff, who go to the Amazon for this, who go to Jewish people who go to the Holy Land, Muslims who go to... I've no problem. That's great stuff. Good for you. God bless you. But it still puts across the idea that spirituality is somewhere else. It's not in... And this is unique to Western Europeans because we've had that stolen from us right from the likes of St. Patrick and Charlemagne and all the early Christian warriors who destroyed our native spiritual tradition. So it's gone from go to Jerusalem, go to Goa, go to the Amazon, go to the internet. Go to the internet. The lure, we're always being drawn in. Go to the scrying mirror. Pour all your emotions into this. All you have to see is the phenomenal amount of cults that are now using the internet. There's more cults than ever using it. They all have similar websites. Always look out for white pages and blue graphics, and they mix all the different religious symbols together. You'll have the Star of David, the Om symbol, the crucifix. That's how they'll always do it. They'll always have that. That's always something to look out for these cults. These are the jinn-infected cults, I call them, because they want your soul, because they're harvesting souls on behalf of something else. And what do they want to do at CERN? They want to build an even bigger particle collider. As if the one they have, the massive thing they have, and all the money they spent on it, and the huge amount of electricity, and the vast amount of resources and engineers they need to keep that thing working, in order that they can shoot one particle from one end and one from another, and to hit them in the middle and cause a thing called a little spark, which they call the Higgs boson. The lure. Come to me, come deeper, come this way, follow the path. Maybe our ancestors used to build bigger cathedrals to try and get to heaven. Bigger spires. We're not religious nuts at CERN. We're rationalist scientists. Maybe, if we build a bigger collider, we'll find the God particle. Let's build a bigger one. Politicians, psychopath politicians, can't falling over themselves to give us billions more to build a bigger one and a bigger one. Just like they built bigger spires on the Christian churches, bigger and bigger. And what did I tell you last week about that lecture I went to about the Div, the demons of the Persian world, the pre-Islamic version of the jinn? The Div are the demon that drives man towards follies to try and get him towards heaven. And that was the purpose of to know the Div. It was to know the Div makes you do follies to get closer and closer to heaven. The wings of Icarus. And these people at CERN are the ultimate of the digitally possessed. This is why the population thing is happening. They want to get rid of humans, but they're not really going to get rid of humans physically in numbers. They're going to get rid of them by changing our consciousness, and this is where we get to the ultimate, if there's such a thing, demonic conspiracy: Common Core. Common Core is the final thrust to destroy the humanity of this planet's children, to make them finally merge perfectly with the machine, because their minds will be completely robotic. They're being gaslighted into a digital consciousness, unable to take care of themselves. Don't know how to actually survive without a computer or a mobile device. And then they will have the perfect storm: the robotic human, the psychopaths in charge, and the digital jinn, all converging to create a future, a tulpa, that I'm glad I won't live to see. I'll be so delighted I'll be so glad that I'll be in the halls of Valhalla drinking beer with Odin and Thor when this all happens. And the question is, if it happens. If we have to serve any purpose in this alternative movement, if we have to serve humanity in any way possible, our job is to keep humanity human, to keep us in touch with nature, to keep us in touch with creativity, to keep us in touch with humor, to keep us in touch with art, music, poetry, lovemaking, gardening. This is our only ball and dice we can play with. Stop looking for alien spacemen to come and save you, gods from other planets, because they're probably the same thing, the same Gintopian deception. Stop romanticizing the Third Reich, the Bolsheviks, and every other dead concept from the past. Stop trying to balance up history by telling us that Hitler was a great guy because Stalin was worse. The future is what matters. The future of human consciousness is the only game left to play for. We'll never be able to stop them from building super colliders, but what we can do is become consciousness insurgents and move below the radar. We don't have to become fabricants like in that awful movie, what was it called? Cloud Atlas. We don't have to become replicants like in Blade Runner. We don't have to become HAL. You see, that's another thing too. What is interesting about HAL is that Kubrick, the genius that he was, also showed us, I know I'm always talking about Stanley Kubrick, but it's important. He showed us that the two astronauts, Frank and Dave, they were kind of robotic. Did you notice that? They had an almost Asperger's, CERN, MIT, Silicon Valley nature about them. They were not smiling and laughing. And Dave became a threat when he started going around the spaceship to relieve his boredom and started sketching. And Hal took an interest in Dave because he sketched pencil drawings and wanted to see them because he knew Dave was the danger. He was the one who was going to stop the demon inside Hal from completing his demonic mission. But those two guys were kind of, and this was also shown in the film, where the guy from NASA who went to investigate the thing on the moon, there's a scene where you see him talking to his daughter on Skype. They were showing that he was more of a full guy. These guys are more laid back. They were not going to be the ones that Hal was going to kill or to take. Hal needed Dave and Frank, military men who would do as they were told and followed orders. And it was going fine until Dave started sketching. And what was happening then, he was creating. He wasn't conforming with Hal's black and white digital world on that spaceship. He was attaining freedom. And that was the message. Get creative, get organic, and become a consciousness insurgent. Because I'm telling you, I've seen things in the last year and seen things in my life which tells me if you think it's weird now, it's going to get a lot weirder in the future. My name is Thomas Sheridan. My website is thomassheridanarts.com. Thank you for listening to the show. Hope you come back next week, and stay tuned for George and Dee on the next show, and check out all of the shows I mentioned, and keep that brain working, and don't let them take your humanity from you. Do not submit to Common Core. Thank you.